Welcome, everyone. My name's Henry, he, him. I'm one of the founders of Working Mass and the managing editor. And I'll just be MC. I'm not actually hosting this panel, but I'll just kick us off and introduce our host and the run of show. Um, and if we can mute Siobhan, if you can just mute people who off mute accidentally. So, welcome, everyone. This panel, the UAWD dissolution dispute, is the title. And this dispute is one of the most important events to occur in the union reform movement in our era since sort of the labor revival. That's we've has been going on for half a decade or a decade now. Given the great interest among rank and file members of both the UAWD, Unite All Workers for Democracy, and the Democratic Socialists of America, with members of Boston DSA, Worcester DSA, and other DSA chapters, DSA labor working group formations, the National Labor Commission, etc. Having been leading voices both for and against dissolution of the UAWD, Working Mass and Boston DSA are moderating this forum um, to, present to host a debate or a discussion, hopefully to hear perspectives, and share those before the wider socialist movement. So we extended invitations to, there's sort of two sides here. We extended invitations to both sides through as many channels as possible. However, unfortunately, and for us, regrettably, the UAWD member action, also known as the SC majority side, um, the UAWD member action and their supporters were unresponsive. As a result, we were unable to ensure both sides were represented. Maybe there are people in the audience from the majority SC position, and we hope they'll speak. So that's definitely wasn't our intention in hosting this, but we will instead do our best to try, make a fair and honest attempt to represent both sides' arguments. Um, as they've been written and published publicly to the best of our ability, or rather, not both sides' arguments, but we'll try to represent the majority SC who's not represented based on the written and published statements. Our moderator, um, who will be Travis, our deputy managing editor, will do their best to represent the arguments of UAWD member action in their stead during the course of moderation and try to play devil's advocate. Obviously we can only do so much and we don't claim to speak for them, but we just want to do our best to make sure that this is not one-sided. So, and then just a shameless plug for Working Mass. This wouldn't be possible without the support from everyone here, but we're happy to be hosting it. We are a party in labor press for Massachusetts DSA chapters, covering current events, especially strikes, labor actions, new organizing campaigns, but also socialist political analysis, especially in Eastern Massachusetts. And if you don't know, we have a board that's comprised from multiple chapters and working groups and political tendencies. And so we host these forums, we publish our digital and physical issues, and we're hoping to host an NPC labor forum soon. So, just lastly, just our moderator, Travis, and I'll let you introduce the speakers instead of myself. But Travis Wayne is the deputy managing editor of Working Mass. They are the elected co-chair of the Somerville branch of Boston DSA and is a rank and file member of the Campaign Workers Guild, a former volunteer with EWOC, Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, and Carolina Amazonians United for Solidarity and Empowerment. And also previously organized their own shop, do contract and strike with CWG and the internet and IBW Local 1245. So you're in very good hands with Travis. Again, Travis will do their best to try to present both sides of the argument and ask questions of the minority SC, in order to, to play devil's advocate, except, but we can only do so much. We can only do our best. And hopefully there are majority SC positions here, members, sympathizers, etc., who will present in the discussion. So again, the run of show, Travis and our minority SC panelists, which I think is Jake. Maybe there's a second one, and then we'll have open discussion. So thank you for coming, Travis.
Thank you, Henry. All right. So overall, this event is of great interest to the entire rank and file movement. So the purpose and structure of this forum is essentially to make the contours of this debate and dispute clearer to the average rank and file member, to provide as much facts as possible, and bring out as many of the perspectives that have been brought out publicly as possible, to give that space for people to engage in political conversation about strategy and the reform movement more broadly. So I'll be taking a more, as explained, oppositional moderating stance towards our speaker from the anti-dissolution side to make up for the absence of a member action member. I'll be introducing that speaker in one moment, and then they will be joining us or after they themselves return and get on those. So I'll get into that in one moment, but that will essentially be the structure itself. So for the purposes of this, how this will go will be I'll explain first Jake S., introduce Jake S. From Worcester DSA. After that, I'll present the side of UAWD pro-dissolution slash UAW member action to the best of my ability based on everything that's been published so far and publicly. And then after that, open to Jake to present the anti-dissolution side. After that point in time, we'll just open up Stack for participants, including with questions that include the discussion itself. So Jake S. is a member of Worcester DSA and has been a UAW member throughout his union's card drive, election, and first contract negotiations. After serving as head steward at Worcester Polytechnic Institute for a year, he has left his bargaining unit but has remained a UAWD member since strikes of the Big Three launched. He was elected as a co-chair of UAWD's 9A chapter early last year, joining three other co-chairs based in New York, where UAW Region 9A is well represented. So Jake S. will be presenting the anti-dissolution side. Now, moving forward with the case of UAW member action, I'll be speaking on the points made by member action to the best of my ability. First, in terms of the actual conflict within UAWD that has led to dissolution, there's a number of different reasons that this step was taken. One, recruitment and participation are down. So since the 2024 convention of UAWD, recruitment has slowed to a trickle. Participation became more resolutions and internal rather than external and shop floor oriented. And because of that, many members' experience of democracy inside of UAWD became about fighting internal battles against union rivals, but had generally experienced only that as a form of political conflict instead of effective shows at the local level to standing up to the boss. So the fights that were happening as a result of this resolution-oriented kind of organizing were not powerful, inspiring, and didn't create more potentials for collective action. So this is one important aspect, right? And the second reason is that the leadership that made the decision to dissolve UAWD as a reform caucus came to that decision after a significant amount of attempts at outreach for agreement. So at UAWD convention in 2024, membership resoundingly elected its leadership. And in that slate that ran, there was emphasis not only on organizing the shop floor, but also international solidarity and common ground within the caucus. So it is that leadership that determined that even though there was an agreement programmatically that there was the importance of ensuring UAWD was working towards, for example, liberation of Palestine, to organizing for immigrant rights and for immigrant workers, but also for shop floor organizing. But despite all of that common ground and that attempt at bridge building, nonetheless, the agreement didn't matter. It still led to this overall culture of major internal conflict at the expense of shop floor organizing. So you can also just still see this commitment in shared values that showed in the resolution. So in the resolution, that was approved by the majority of for UAWD to dissolve, there was inclusion of taking the caucus funds and putting them to other frontline organizations, including other union reform caucuses, but also towards organizations working for Palestinian liberation and for immigrant liberation. So these are material advancements that show similar politics across both sides. So the issue wasn't shop floor organizing itself was harmed by toxic conflict. Like one side had been focused on shop floor fights, the other had not. But this overall conflict led to a culture of internal toxicity. And that toxic convention or like that toxic culture within the UAWD was identified not only by, people who had less vested interest in UAWD, it was identified by founders of the entire Reform Caucus. The decision to dissolve was undertaken by people with stakes in this, as there are on both sides. But the two formations within the caucus were differently distributed. So even though there were auto workers, people within the manufacturing on both sides of the conflict, and other parts of the UAW base were represented on both sides, a disproportionate number of union activists against dissolution drew from higher education and legal services. So these made organizing on the shop floor and manufacturing, where the majority of the organizing and the base of membership is, much more difficult. Reaching programmatic unity, even more difficult. What did this lead to? A decrease in participation, particularly among auto workers in UAWD. So finally, there is the point that like there have been many, many iterations of these reform caucuses. The UAWD is this extremely important one in this era, but there have been ones that organize within the UAW for reform directions. This particular entity is not necessarily the end of reform in and of itself. So we can go in two different directions, and this is what the leadership identified. If a committee can't agree to do the same work in a mass organization, they may still decide to split into two different focuses. One committee focusing on one and the other committee focusing on different work. So in this case, you have two different parts of former UAWD who want to work on two different things. They can do it in two different spaces within the same union. So the dissolution resolution allowed everyone to use UAWD member contact lists to build those formations as they saw fit, whether for member action or the class struggle orientation of internal organizing championed by those against dissolution. So what's wrong with two directions formed independently within the union? And finally, the dissolution of the UAWD does not mean, again, the dissolution of reform itself. So in all of these cases, all of the members and participants that are involved with the formations that result from the dissolution of UAWD can continue to organize at the rank and file level. And so UAWD member action, for example, has already committed to the same goals as UAWD, including electing militant union leaders, preparing for 2028 contract expiration, building locals with active and engaged members, and that operation has already begun and is already starting and already is done independently. So the question is, even if the dissolution is disputed, when the organizing is happening in a different room, is there the need for UAWD as an entity? And so these are the points that are brought up more or less publicly by all of the member actions linked to this ability. Now, in terms of the next member, Jake S. again will be presenting the side of anti-dissolution. I don't know if Jake S. is yet here. We're running a little bit early on time. So
Yeah.
instead, while that's happening, we can, I suppose, open up Stack for anyone else, if anyone else has anything that was not drawn out in the last, I don't know, presentation on member actions points. Stack's up. First, Steve. See.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Steve Zeltzer, and I'm a member of the Newspaper Guild in San Francisco. and I've been covering it. I produce a show called Work Week. So I think that the issues, the political issues of difference that took place in UAW was over Palestine, uh, the getting rid of bonds from Palestine. Also, the issue of the trade war. A resolution was coming up around the issue of the trade war, and democracy. The structure of UAW, like my union, the CWA, and most national unions, are not democratic. They don't have a democratic process of debate and discussion on political issues. And that's a fundamental issue in the labor movement. And I think that the dissolution, the liquidation of this Unite All Workers for Democracy was really an attempt to prevent a discussion in the membership. If they wanted to, they didn't like the direction it was going, they could have just left and moved on and formed their own organization. They didn't do that. And it also raised the question of labor notes and this caucus, Bread and Roses, which organized internally to take this vote without really a serious amount of discussion, in my view. And I think that that's a serious question. If you're going to dissolve an organization, you need to have a discussion and a proper time and to have a democratic debate. I understand there are UAW members who were not able to vote in this discussion. They were excluded from the vote. So the whole process of the vote was manipulated. The chat was shut off and people were muted, so they couldn't even have an actual exchange discussion. So that's a serious problem. My view is there needs to be more caucuses in unions, including my union, many unions, for discussion and debate. The more, the better for a democratic process. And I think that it's a blow against democracy and the labor movement. That's my view.
Steve? Stack remains open.
Actually, if I may, we have Andrew Bergman joining us now, who is a member of the UAWD steering committee minority from the previous term, and is going to chime in now, calling in from the shop floor, as I understand it. Thank you, Andrew. So we had a question on if you could give a timeline of the history of UAWD. Andrew, would you be able to speak to that?
Sure, yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, as Siobhan said, I'm at work today. It's a little slow, so I am actually able to speak, but I might get pulled away. Apologies. I wasn't expecting to necessarily have a speaking role, and if I do get pulled away, there's a few other people like Martha, who's on the call and is still a member of the steering committee that can speak. But yeah, were you looking for like an entire history of UAWD or just a recent history?
I think a longer one, actually. That seems to be the question we got from Peter there. So yeah, if you could, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, I don't know if people here are down to be put on the spot. There are people who were there at the actual very founding. So maybe I'll just give a brief overview and then we could have someone like Jesse Kelly jump in to fill in any holes because I wasn't there from the actual outset. But yeah, in 2019, a group of rank and file members from across the UAW started coming together basically in the wake of the massive corruption scandal that sent 2 former presidents to prison and another, I think maybe 18 members of the International Executive Board. Basically, sorry, hold on one second. Apologies. Yeah, basically, at that point, people were coming together to try to build support for what's called a special convention in the UAW. And essentially, the short version is that that effort failed. But in the process of trying to bring that group together to have a special convention for basically direct elections in the UAW, UAWD sort of formed. And ultimately, there was a referendum on direct elections as a result of the settlement of the corruption scandal. And that sort of was the birth and also the kind of maybe motivation for a lot of the early UAWD organizers, myself included. And that's kind of the origin of the outreach by the auto workers who really sort of began UAWD to the other sectors like higher ed and legal services, especially, kind of bringing together the coalition that ultimately became UAWD. In the preceding years, we had big successes at the Constitutional Convention, which happens every 4 years in the UAW, where the majority of the delegates we got elected actually were from higher ed and legal services, because those are kind of more, kind of naturally less leaning rank and file led parts of the UAW with less of a stronghold of the administration caucus, the sort of old guard that had been running the UAW bureaucracy for years. And then we ran a slate to get Sean Fain and 6 other members elected to our international executive board. And then we were a part of the sort of stand-up strike. So that's the first few years of UAWD's existence. And then the last year and a half or so is when there became a little bit more of a factionalization that led, so that was the end of the election itself was late 2023, and then the second round was early 2024. And then the last year and a half or so is where some of the factionalization began, that we saw sort of leading to this crisis in UAWD and ultimately this illegitimate attempt to dissolve UAWD. So I can just stop there and see if, that was helpful. If people want to get into more details, and maybe we can get into the more recent history separately if people haven't heard that yet.
Cool. Thank you so much. Evan, did you want to say this verbally, or are you good with just the?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to state it was 2022 after the Constitutional Convention was the first round of the IEB elections, and then the runoff was in 2023. I think Andrew just slipped up and said 2023, 2024. And then all of this, of course, builds on decades of reform and rank and file agitation and organizing. Drum was the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement. We had New Directions, Auto Worker Caravan. So iterations of union reform have existed for decades and perhaps the entirety of the UAW.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Evan. All right. So in terms of moving forward, Andrew, I did want to ask you directly what your thoughts were on the recent dispute. So if you could get into specifically your perspective on that, that would be great.
Sure. I can start off, and then I think there's other wonderful folks here who can maybe chime in as well, who have helped kind of lead the sort of what we're kind of referring to as the class struggle wing. Yeah, I mean, there was, I understand, sorry I was late, that you all read out some of the points from the sort of pro-dissolution side. Is that correct? Did you already do that?
Yes, so that perspective was presented, and at this point, basically, it's you, and then Jake S. is also representing on the anti-dissolution side, but wanted to give you space for providing your perspective since he's almost here.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think that largely, unfortunately, the narrative presented by the pro-dissolution side is inaccurate. I mean, there's obviously truth to different components of it. The membership meetings since that side won the steering committee election have been very contentious. That's sort of not surprising, given that we're a membership organization where we have quarterly membership meetings. We have a years-long history of our membership meetings being the places where we make really big decisions that are consequential to the future of the organization. In particular, all of the things in our history that you heard were things decided at our membership meetings. So the decision to run for convention delegate positions, to show up to the UAW convention with a program, the decision to have a slate and who we chose these were all decisions made at membership meetings by the UAWD membership, years-long history of doing that. So there was no reason to imagine that that would stop. In fact, it was important that it didn't stop. That was the sort of democratic character of UAWD. And yet the steering committee sort of members who were pro-dissolution seem to have really wanted that to not just stop, but completely go away. So the last two membership meetings since day one, there were probably between 150 to 200 members. Sorry, there were 3 membership meetings since day one. Quite a large portion of our membership attended those membership meetings, you know, about 25 to 30%. And yet, which is more than ever had been sort of regularly attending in the past. And yet what we saw was a real opposition to there even being debate about the future of the caucus, much less the fact that the steering committee members who won their elections didn't seem to want to engage or turn out any of the folks who were their supporters. And so ultimately their major priorities didn't succeed. In particular, they brought an attempt to actually create quorum requirements just for higher ed and legal services members, such that basically we couldn't even have UAWD membership meetings anymore, or at least that was their goal. And so, yeah, so I mean, it's hard to know how much of the weeds to get into, but essentially there's truth to the fact that there was contention, but I don't think there's any truth to the fact that that contention was in any way inappropriate, that that toxicity turned people away. And in fact, what we see is that at the end of last year, before the UAWD convention, there was an enormous recruitment of members and the biggest new sort of influx of members that we'd ever seen. So yeah, I just think that the narrative is unfortunately sort of a misconstrual and a totally inaccurate one of the reality. And instead, the basis for the split, I think, is actually a political one. And it's a political one that kind of emerges from about a year and a half ago when Sean Fain sort of wanted UAWD's endorsement of his tentative agreements in the big 3 contracts. And basically there wasn't an appetite for doing that within UAWD. And, you know, even the sort of folks that were, you know, emerging as his eventual allies sort of more closely didn't even support that. And so, but there was this kind of tension that emerged, this notion that our top leadership and our staff wanted to sort of basically just say nice things about those TAs, and nobody else actually wanted to denigrate them or oppose them. But the sort of emerging class struggle wing wanted to take a different position, a more neutral one, where we actually called balls and strikes and talked about both the good things and the bad things in those TAs. And then in the year and a half since then, there's basically been sort of a split over questions of independence, questions of how we talk about militancy, basically with one wing, the kind of more reform-oriented wing, basically just wanting to align with Fain on essentially everything. And the other wing, not necessarily wanting to oppose Fain, but also wanting to be able to maintain independence and be able to talk plainly about certain kinds of disagreements. For instance, regarding tariffs, where there was a lot of disagreements with Fain's position. So anyway, that's like a high-level summary of the political disagreements that I think are the actual cause for the breaking point between these two factions.
Thank you, Andrew. Just to make a few different points from the member action side, I think that one thing that was mentioned just now was the recruitment went up significantly before convention in 2024, which is true. It's also not in dispute, to be fair. Recruitment itself is actually went down after the convention, and that's been the argument for member action. So that trickle went from 20 to 5-ish new members per, and also a significant decrease in core members dropping out. And then another thing that was brought up was that legal services and higher education requirements may have been targeted, but wouldn't that also mean that they were unevenly distributed in a way? And if that is true, since anti-dissolution has made this point of making the point that there are auto workers within, of course, within the anti-dissolution side as well, is that a problem? Like, is this uneven distribution a problem? So these are just like open questions. Judy, you have your hand up. Falling on you.
Yes, hi. I'm new to the steering committee since last September, so I'm hoping that Martha can describe some of the previous steering committee issues since she was on it before last September and is now on it. What I saw when I got on the steering committee was a literally the complaint about the membership meetings. Okay, the membership meetings were restricted, of course, one every 3 months, and they were supposed to be restricted to 2 hours. Unfortunately, of course, the membership meetings always started late, thanks to our chair, who, of course, waited for more people to come in. And then there would be not enough real effort to control the meeting so that the resolutions could be discussed. One would have to say, as Andrew was indicating, the the proposals that were being made as resolutions that had to be voted on by the membership, some of them were, quote, contentious. Not to me, I liked all of them, but the reality was for the other side, they were contentious. Now, one thing I want to mention is Palestine. What you have to know is that of all the manufacturing locals within the UAW, only one of them, as at an actual real membership meeting, passed a anti genocide motion. And that was actually at the chair, Scott Holdison's local, because a member of his group, made the motion and he felt he had to second it. The other place where it passed was, in fact, at a joint council meeting of my local 600. And that's partly because the secretary treasurer of my local is Lebanese descent. So there was an effort at least to condemn genocide. But of all the hullabaloo about what is kind of whispered, well, they say, okay, the majority says we had to split off because of too much talk. The workers in the plants, they'll kind of run away if you bring up Palestine. Well, I'm sorry, it actually hasn't been brought up in most of the plants. That's first off. Second off, my experience, and I'm 78 and I was been in the UAW over 40 years. What I have brought up everything from Palestine to Libya to, Iraq, Iran, etc. And I was still elected numerous times to the Tool and Die Executive Board of UAW Local 600, which is the big Ford Rouge plant in Dearborn. And I'm going to shut up now, but I like specifics, and I'm hoping Martha can give specifics. And Jesse usually has a very good handle on this different stuff too. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Really appreciate it. Representing 1 point from the member side or member action side, it's worth noting that the resolution to dissolve the caucus included distributing funds from the remaining funds to union reform caucuses, but also including organizations that were proposed. Moving forward, I wanted to invite Jake S. up, but first I'm going to read his bio again real quick, and then invite him to be able to speak. After that, we'll move to stack open for discussion generally on the subject. But first, Jake S. is a member of Worcester DSA and has been a UAW member throughout his union's card drive, election, and first contract negotiations. After serving as head steward at Worcester Polytechnic Institute for a year, he has left his bargaining unit but has remained a UAWD member since strikes of the Big Three launched. He was elected as a co-chair of UAWD's and 9A chapter early last year, joining 3 other co-chairs based in New York, where UAW Region 9A is well represented. Jake S., please feel free to discuss your perspective.
Sure. I'm sorry for being so late. I'm not really sure, exactly what's been discussed thus far. You want me to give sort of an overview on my thoughts, reflections, dissolution?
Absolutely. So basically, I have presented the member action perspectives as written publicly. Andrew as well as Judy have both also spoken a little bit to their perspectives as participants, but wanted to give you the time to basically lay out what your perspective is on everything that happened with the UAWD dissolution dispute. You have a 5 to 10 minute window, as much time as you like.
Yeah, I can keep things to that level of brevity. I will say that, the steering committee minority and the group of, UAWD members that have stuck together against the dissolution vote, they've shared a lot of perspectives. I'm sure some links have been floating in the chat. I do agree with a lot of the analysis that's been put forth. And I just saw Henry's message in the chat that there's been arguably a little bit too much focus maybe on procedure and the validity of the dissolution vote. I do think that stuff is important, but let me give my overarching perspective on the way things have played out. The history of UAWD as I've experienced it over the last, few years now.
Real quick, Jake, it was the exact opposite. We haven't gotten into the concrete details of what happened in the last bit.
Okay, sorry. Henry's tricking me. Okay. Well, anyway.
So enlighten us on both dimensions, everything you want to cover.
Sure. Yeah, so as was said, I was elected co-chair of the 9A chapter. Region 9A is the only region with a regional chapter that was something of an outgrowth of the campaign to elect Brandon Mencia, which I was not a member of the caucus at that time while he was running his campaign, or while his campaign was sort of being run. My understanding, of early UAWD history is that there really were these how should I say, powerful poles around which, the organization focused its energies. It had a lot of common goals. That was one member, one vote. Then it was some small pieces of constitutional reform, as I understand it, at the Constitutional Convention. And it was electing a sort of breakthrough group of reformers onto the International Executive Board. I feel like I joined the caucus once those things had occurred. And in the aftermath of those things, those really strong polls around which everyone is aligning goals, political differences, arise and become very clear, because the question is, what do we do now? I think one of the biggest questions that persisted up until this point has been, we got a bunch of people elected in the National Executive Board. What is our plan after that? How do we interact with them? What's their relationship to us? I wouldn't necessarily. I think that those questions went unresolved during the campaign, and it's hard to resolve them after the fact, to be completely fair. But there are big questions. I think the crux of it lies in, what is the purpose of a caucus in a union? Is it a political party within the union, a political organization? It's very politicized, on the direction that the union should go in, or is it maybe more akin, outside of election season, is it more akin to something like a training center for building people's skills around, is it mostly centered on bread and butter, union issues, that sort of thing? Those are good questions, and those tensions, they get stronger once the big ticket items, the big ticket goals have been achieved in some way. What happens next? What are we here for? What are we doing? And those only became, I think, a little bit more exacerbated over time. I think that level of contention is good. I think that deliberation on those really big questions is healthy. I think basically the same thing about DSA. We have our own national convention coming up in August. I've been elected as a delegate for our chapter. There are really big, contentious questions that face DSA in a very similar way. And I think it's good and it's healthy when members are openly discussing those things. The only real critique that I have, right? I mean, this is the point of contention around dissolution, is the desire to work around those things. I generally agree that a lot of normal sort of democratic rules were sidestepped in order to force this dissolution vote through. I think that kind of shows in how close the vote was, and some of the other sort of things that have been elaborated very well. A lot of members in that meeting didn't get to vote because the voting window was only open for so long. A lot of members who, are current members in good standing weren't allowed into the meeting or were kicked out, and there was some confusion about their membership status that was never resolved. I'm of the opinion that those people were members, that sort of thing. That's an effort to sidestep that political contention, those political disagreements, rather than to work through them. And at our first convention, back in September of last year, I think the loose grouping, not to paint with the broadest stroke possible, but the loose grouping that ended up being pro-dissolution really overwhelmingly won, steering committee elections. Accepted that result. I volunteered to audit that election, but I wasn't expecting to find anything, that would change the results, and I definitely did not. We accepted that result, and it was accepted to a certain degree. Okay, these people have been put in leadership positions, but that did not go on to mean that they had complete hegemony over what UAWD does, how it operates, the positions that it takes, its politics, its purpose, its goals. I think this group, basically from the steering committee majority, sort of found that out very quickly soon after convention. There were some resolutions that some folks from that group proposed that failed or passed somewhat narrowly. And there were some other resolutions that were more politicized in the way that I think they're disagreeable towards, that passed very, very strongly. Ultimately, my own perspective on the push for a dissolution vote was, hey, the politics of the steering committee majority are not quite so popular that they can win all of these fights. There are meaningful elements in UAW's membership that, it's a very active fight over what the organization's goals and politics are. It's not easily just sort of quashed. This debate isn't easily sidestepped. And so rather than, really work through that in a productive way, I think the opinion from the steering committee majority was basically, it's time for a split. We need to find a good way of splitting such that, this project is sort of over and we can transition into something where, our group has more control over what the outcome and the politics and the goals are. There's been historically a lot of influence, not to make this about, particular personalities, but a lot of influence from leading voices in labor notes, Teamsters for a Democratic Union. They certainly have their own ideas and strategies. Many of these founding members and core members are socialists. They have very specific socialist politics, ideas about how socialists should engage themselves in the labor movement. I happen to disagree with a lot of their ideas about that stuff, but I do respect their perspective. That was the influence that I think did also play a role in the decision to dissolve. Hey, it doesn't seem like a large enough component of the membership is super down to follow a model along the lines of TDU, which in my opinion operates more like a training center than a political organization in the union. I think that becomes clear when TDU is very, very hesitant to critique, IBT's current leadership, right? I think political independence is important. Other people didn't think that political independence in UAWD was important. Anyway, all that is to say, a lot of these factors pressing towards the dissolution vote, lots of things I disagree with. You can vote to dissolve the caucus. You should do it procedurally. It should be democratic. It should be a democratic decision. I don't think that the meeting in which that vote was passed was, run properly. And I think that that's, again, indicative of the real motivation here. Hey, we kind of want to end this project and move along somewhere else, because we're challenged in getting the particular vision that we have. That's my very broad perspective. I don't know if I'm skimming over anything or not providing any enough information or anything. So I'm taking a look at the chat just in case. Okay. I don't see any questions.
I think you're good. At this point, thank you for your perspective, Jake. Really appreciate it. And for coming after literally doing a protest right before this. Appreciate your presence. So from this point, we're going to open up Stack for participation overall. So at this point, panelists have finished speaking. We have presented the perspectives in that sense. And so we'll open up Stack. I'm going to, just for the purposes of directing some participation so people have a sense of, maybe what directions they might want to think about and discuss. There will be a few different questions in the chat, but Stack will be open for overall conversation on the dissolution dispute overall. So in terms of the questions for to think about participation, posting them now. After which I will also verbally explain the sense of Stack, as Siobhan mentioned. So the questions to think about might be, what do both sides disagree about? Can disagreements like this be overcome, or is there a time when it's worth going in different organizational directions? What does this divide mean for the future of the UAW? What's the impact on Sean Fain's administration, 2028 contracts, and general strike planning? And how should this inform the rank and file strategy in labor unions? So these are questions that are worth engaging. In terms of Stack, how this works is please just type Stack into the chat. If you'd like to contribute, all you have to type is Stack. At that point, you'll be added to a queue. That queue is what we'll be going off of in order to invite people into participation. There will be a 3-minute time limit for participation. So at that point, I'll ask you to wrap up everything that you're saying and move on to the next. So Stack is open, starting with Frank.
Thank you. I've introduced myself in the chat. I'm a 50-year member of the UAW, came up through General Motors, where I organized for 20 years and have been part of the reform movements in the UAW, going as far back as Locals Opposed to Concessions, New Directions, was a co-founder of Auto Worker Caravan, and some of the folks that were in the Auto Worker Caravan were some of the original voices that helped to form the UAWD. I've been involved with the UAWD since it's, can you hear me? I'm getting a little bit of blips here. Okay, good. So, and I think that I'm going to say a few things. I don't pretend to have a complete analysis in 3 minutes, but I think that one of the great influences over the formation of the UAWD was labor notes and TDU. And the early leadership that was trying to model what the UAWD would be like were wanting it to be like the TDU. And early on, the voice that was brought in to help UAW members get organized was Ken Paff from the TDU. And he brought a model that generally constituted a very narrow form of unionism that preferred to deal with shop issues, did not want to deal with political issues. It's questionable about just exactly how democratic the TDU was and how responsive it was to the membership. And but this was a very strong model that was brought into the UAWD. And one of the
Frank, you have 1 minute. Just
okay,
to let you know, you have 1 minute remaining.
All right, so let me cut it short and say that we also have to be following the money. And the reason the UAWD, folks wanted to dissolve it is because they had quite a cash collection, partly funded through TDU, partly funded through something called the Solidarity Action Fund, of 501c3. And those funds were, the folks who commanded those funds wanted to take those funds away from the UAWD. And that was the only reason, the way to do it was to dissolve the UAWD. And then you had the dispersal of the funds. So I was in the group that wanted to maintain the UAWD, was against dissolution, but I saw that as the force that brought about the dissolution that came about.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Frank. Really appreciate it. Moving forward to the next person on Stack, we have Jessica.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jessie Kelly. I'm part of UAW Local 160. I am a GM skilled trades worker in Warren, Michigan. I was also a founder of the UAWD. I was part of it during the 2019 strike when a group of us got together and decided to form a caucus that was reflective of the old New Directions caucus, of which one of the more prominent leaders, Pete Kelly, came out of my local and gave us the idea. So I was also part of the group that did not want to disband the UAWD. I do think, unfortunately, there's a lot of false narratives of why particular groups did choose to dissolve. None of the narratives that actually are the truth of the intent, I believe. I hear a lot of things about, toxic group chats and about Palestine. I just want to squash those really quick and say that as far as the group chat went, there was lots of recommendations on how to monitor it better, to do a better job with it, that were never even taken or tried, because it was easier to keep it toxic, so that they had a reason to go ahead and destroy the UAWD. And I think that the question of when were we going to dissolve it started in people's mind right at the time of the big three tentative agreements. There was a group of auto workers that got together that were talking about the goods and bad parts of the big three agreements. And at the same time, there was a very big push that we were going to call them record-breaking contracts. The Fain administration really, really wanted to go ahead and say that it was the most historic wins that we've ever had inside of the UAW and gloss over all of the holes that were left and all of the loopholes. Some of us were really upset at the fact that we were taking on a narrative saying that just tiers were gone when that wasn't true. Some of us were really upset saying we won work-life balance when we did not. So we were talking about it and we wanted to put out a list of lowlights, at which time it was met with like a lot of disdain with other people inside of the caucus, because they just really thought the answer was to go ahead and kind of gold star everything the Fain administration does during his whole entire time in term, because we endorsed him. And so that's when the question of independence came into question. And that's what we had to start thinking about. And I think a group of people do not want to be independent of Sean Fain particularly, and the people that were endorsed by the UAWD during the IEB elections. And I think a group of us thought it was important that we maintained our independence and that the caucus was bigger than individuals. And that's where a lot of the contention started coming into play. And I think that everything after that was just quick, easy narratives that were easy to get people on board. I do see the questions in the chat, so I'm going to go through them really quickly because I know I don't have a ton of time. So I would say, is it worth going into different organizational directions? I think at times it is, and I think maybe the UAWD was approaching that. Being a founding member, if I could go back, the one thing I would do is make sure that there were more like-minded people in the beginning.
We're almost
And
at
do a
time
little,
here.
oh yeah, and do a little bit more vetting. Yeah, I'll end it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, and in line with Progressive Stack, because Jake presented in advance, I'm going to first go to Martha and then Jake. Martha?
Hi, I'm Martha Gravatt. I'm a retired member of UAW Local 869, which is the Warren stamping plant of what's now Stellantis, formerly Chrysler, and the plant is in Warren, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. And I have served on the UAWD steering committee from I think 2019 to 2024, and rejoined recently when there was a vacancy for a retiree representative, and no one else was nominated other than myself. So I consider myself a member of the steering committee, and support the group that opposed dissolving UAWD. And I will just say that the whole process that led to this so-called dissolution was flawed from beginning to end, from the fact that members of the steering committee who were opposed to it weren't even going to be notified, but somehow the information was leaked, would not even have been notified of this intent until the resolution was shared with the entire membership. And a motion to dissolve an organization should rightly be considered a bylaws amendment, which would have meant it should have been brought up read at the April membership meeting, and then voted on at the subsequent membership meeting, not at that April membership meeting. And it would have needed a 2/3 majority, which it did not have. And there were other numerous improprieties that give weight to the argument that this dissolution was illegitimate, and which is why some of us are going forward as UAWD. Wow, okay. Just on Palestine, the steering committee majority, the pro-dissolution group, really was not for giving anything beyond just very cursory mention to solidarity with Palestine. The steering committee and staff had a retreat in January of last year, and at that retreat, a member of staff said that a Palestine solidarity working group that had had several meetings and had put on educational forums. The staff member said that committee doesn't even exist. And the chair of the steering committee said that if members are working
Right, we're wrapping up real quick.
I'll finish my sentence. Palestine solidarity, they're not reforming the UAW. And my counter argument is that the UAW cannot call itself reformed if it's not able to take a strong stand in solidarity against this horrific genocide that is still going on. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Martha. Really appreciate it. We have, I think, Jake followed by Tolly, and then we'll move up to Andrew again. Jake?
I'll withdraw my stack and let Tolly speak.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
So yeah, apologies if there's background noise. I'm also on my shift, and if I have to drop off, it's maybe because my supervisor is driving by or something like that. But my name's Tolly. I'm a member of UAW Local 22. It's a GM plant in Detroit. I'm also one of the co-chairs of UAWD's organizing committee. I've been for about a year and a half or 2 years now. And I just wanted to, I also stand on the side against dissolution, share a lot of what's been said. I wanted to take a minute to address, unfortunately, another inaccurate narrative that the steering committee majority put out, which is about UAWD's growth. And while it's true that after the UAWD convention, UAWD's membership count, additions of new members reduced, our contact list and new UAW members that have somehow become in contact with UAWD continue to grow and actually grew at the same or maybe even a larger rate than normal. So since then, we had over 400 new UAW contacts added to our rosters. These are people who either attended one of our trainings, which was ongoing, or just through local organizing, signed up for updates from UAWD. And, I think, unfortunately, rather than studying this and trying to understand what does rank and file organizing look like in the UAW in this current moment, especially when, local militancy is hard to get moving. I see this as another move by the steering committee majority to shy away from that analysis and say, well, it's easier to scrap this and start over. And meanwhile, many of us in UAWD, we continue to organize. We had an active organizing committee where across more than 10 UAW locals, we have an active EV committee. We put out a 2028 general strike flyer. Like I said, we had a training with more than 50 rank and file members joining. And so, I think there are legitimate questions about how to organize right now in this current context. But it's simply false to say that UAWD is not growing or stopped growing as a result of these tensions. And I'll just conclude by saying, I share this analysis that steering committee majority wanted to become a training center where they are able to have top-down control rather than a vibrant, democratic, or member-led organization that gets to set political priorities and creates a space for workers to debate these important political questions, like what we're going to do about the EV transition or tariffs or Palestine. And I still think that's the right way forward.
Thank you. All right. Andrew, you're on set.
Hey, yeah, I mean, I'm glad Tully came back to these questions about UAWD's growth. Um, yeah, because I know you brought them up after I last spoke, Travis. I mean, I'm actually kind of curious for everyone here if you find these arguments compelling. Not Tully's, but the ones coming from the pro-dissolution side. So I know Siobhan put up a plot earlier. I don't know if you're able to bring that back up or if that's challenging, but it's kind of this funny thing. Like, according to this, the other thing that's challenging is just that this argument has shifted kind of in an ongoing way back and forth from the pro-dissolution folks. So, go back to, the end of 2023 there. So I think it says 2023-07. So, after that comes September and October. That's when we all know sort of the genocide in Gaza began, right? So at that time, we were hearing this immense call from the folks who ended up being the pro-dissolution side. This was a time when, we had just had this TA dispute that Jesse Kelly did a great job of summarizing the enormous tensions that came out of sort of wanting to put a veneer on the TAs versus being more honest about them. We had just had this moment where the chair of our steering committee and our two staff member had basically tried to wrest control of the narrative, even though we passed a commitment to remain neutral as UAWD. They basically tried to just cheerlead. So right after that that period is also when we had our membership meeting to take a very strong pro-Palestine stance, even though, as you heard from Martha and others, the majority of the steering committee was opposed to it. None of that time led to the mass reductions in membership growth. The reality is we just didn't have a ton of membership growth during any of these years because
We're at 1 minute,
UAWD,
Andrew.
yep, UAWD was something that wasn't, growing a ton. So then we get to the sort of end of 2024 and we have this huge peak. Basically every person that had even thought about becoming a UAWD member in the last 2 years, we finally get them to join. I mean, it's true that after that, again, this is a plot that we made, not the other side made. So we're trying to be very honest about the numbers. That growth did slow after that. Was it because of some particular position that happened or some contentious membership meeting that was not widely known about? I think it's probably more likely that it was that we got so many people to join, right before the convention that we essentially cleared out the pool of people who were even thinking of joining. But anyway, I'd love to hear from the rest of the folks here. Like, do you find that compelling? That's about the only leg that I think that the pro-dissolution side has to stand on. Basically, the rest of their narrative is totally inaccurate, in my opinion. So I'd love to hear if other folks are compelled that that's the reason why they thought we needed to dissolve the organization.
Thank you, Andrew. Just to bring up one member action potential point on this, it would be like, I guess, a question that if there is like a ceiling on potential membership recruitment, how one in the rank and file reform movement moves beyond that. Like, is the member action step of going in two different directions the way by which to solve this problem of the trickling? I also wanted to read out Aaron's comment from the chat, so I'm going to do that. Quote, I'm on an interstate bus, so I can't go on a mic, so I'll just add in the chat that another way to view this is a technocratic approach versus member democracy. Much of the pro-dissolution camp also expressed frustration at disagreements among membership and at people dissenting from leadership. This suggests a sort of those at the top know best approach that to me is at odds with the preferable approach of embracing the messy but ultimately member-led and solidaristic approach of member democracy. On Stack, we have Henry next.
Hey, comrades. First of all, again, I want to thank you for coming just on behalf of Working Mass. And also, again, I apologize that we weren't, I don't envy Travis having to play the probably unpopular role of devil's advocate. But that wasn't our intention. But obviously, we didn't want to cancel the meeting just because one side didn't want to come. So, but just not that I'm apolitical as a managing editor, but just to speak as an individual, I think this conversation is so important, and it's really not just about UAWD. It amazes me to no end that it's so obvious and in some sense open that Labor Notes, UAWD, Solidarity, and TDU, and also Bread and Roses are just come from Solidarity. Solidarity never dissolved. Solidarity founded Labor Notes, founded TDU. It's the same people. And then UAWD, you know, how Bread and Roses came out of Solidarity, it's not exactly clear to me, but it's one, you know, I'm a Trotskyist. I love Trotskyism, but I would never expect the rest of the labor movement, the rest of the labor left, to let my Trotskyist group control all these supposedly open democratic groups. But that's the reality of what's happening, is that the solidarity tendency controls all these groups. That's not new. It's not new with UAWD. It's the same with labor notes. Everyone loves labor notes. You can't say anything bad about labor notes, but it's totally undemocratic. Nobody votes to set the agenda. And not only is it undemocratic, it actually holds back the socialistization of the labor left, in that you go to labor notes, you learn about how to organize a union or how to fight, but there's, you know, thousands of people, many who are socialists, and there's no debating and voting, and you have a speaker, a political speaker, it's the mayor of Chicago, who is not a socialist, but a progressive Democrat. And so I think it's, I mean, I think it was Andrew's question, do these arguments work? They work, not because they're true, not because they're the genuine reason, but I believe they're selected to work, right? Why is it that they say, oh, well, Region 9A is just, you know, grad students, like, and they're not real auto workers, even though it's like, you know, not like there's loads of academic or lawyers on both sides, and like mostly not auto workers on either side, although there's auto workers on both sides. It's because that works. It's because that idea works and convinces people. This is the same thing that happened with the UAW 9A staff fight. Their response, it wasn't to deal with the actual facts at hand, it was to sort of express truisms. But the good news is we need this politics of them blocking this political thing was always their intention. It was never their intention to let UAWD get out of control. It did. They had to shut it down. But now there's an opportunity to actually have a major reform element that isn't held back by this, and that can, and I'll wrap up, that can actually express socialism, not bread and butter reformism, but real socialism in the movement, and fight for Palestine, fight for a new party, etc. And I think that's tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Judy, you're on stack.
Hi. So, as you know, I'm on the UAWD steering committee, and I'm actually retired from the big Ford Rouge plant. But I have to bring up this thing that people have been hammering on in our minority group, which is literally the difficulty of having a staff-run organization. And first off, what you should know is that people that are in DSA and in labor notes that were in Solidarity, they quit Solidarity many years ago. And because they wanted to devote themselves to DSA and probably labor notes. So that they actually are not affiliated with Solidarity Group at this time. But, you know, there obviously are some people that's, including myself, that are still in Solidarity. And it's not a democratic centralist organization. So there, I would call a wide variety of opinions. But the thing about staff that's really awful is that they were trained in, I guess, the labor notes way of doing things, although even labor notes is at this point to the left of our staff, or what was our staff. And in particular, I'm at the Rouge plant, okay? I still have cred at the Rouge plant. People still come up to me and call me from the Rouge plant. And it takes literally 10 hours to get out to, well, probably 20 hours to get out to all the gates, and probably 5,000 flyers. We actually got people, and staff just said, no, you can have 500 flyers. 500 flyers. And with that was for our first training this year. Now, when I stood out there for the 8 hours that I did, that actually did achieve that 4 people did sign up for the training. And now we're in conversation with those 4 people. But in terms of recruitment, you can't find people unless you outreach to them. And yet staff was saying you can't just scatter out these leaflets to nameless people. And I understand that approach. I mean, that is not a bad approach. It's just that you can't really particularly reach a whole lot of people. And if you have a retiree like myself, I am a gift. I actually have time to get out to the gate. So you get my drift, right? I mean, everybody's situation is different, but you have to use what you've got. So, and I'll quit there. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. We have Steve on Stack.
Yeah.
Stack is still open as well.
I mean, I think what is most disturbing, not just with UAW and the Teamsters, is there's no debate and discussion in the labor movement about fascism and the danger of a coup d'etat, a martial law, a real attack on the working class and democratic rights, the attack, and how labor should mobilize, organize, and educate around those issues. That's missing. And I think that the UAW leadership in supporting, as long with the Teamster leadership in supporting the trade war, is playing into the hands of the imperialist. They're helping the imperialist war drive, because that's what ends up happening when you have trade wars. And the fact that Thane did not reach out to Canadian and Mexican auto workers, he unilaterally supported this without a discussion in the UAW. And again, that's the problem of no debate and discussion in the labor movement, is a serious systemic problem. I mean, I think that we need a working class movement. Everyone agrees about that. How do you get it? Well, there was a movement for a May Day, May Day Strong, which organized there over 1,000 protests. The UAW, my union, the CWA, could have mobilized the membership to join this movement for May Day. They didn't. And I understand there was a struggle in Detroit to get the UAW involved. It didn't mobilize. I don't think this bureaucracy wants a mass working class movement, because they lose control of it. If there are hundreds of thousands of millions of workers marching in this country, it becomes very difficult for this union bureaucracy to control that. And I think that's where we have to go politically in the labor movement, towards the formation of a mass working class movement, but a political alternative. There is no working class party there's a political vacuum. That's another issue that neither the Teamsters or the UAW and my union, the CWA, want to address: the bankruptcy of supporting the Democrats. These are political issues which have to be addressed by the working class in the labor movement, and they were being discussed and debated in UAWD. We need the same thing in all the unions, not just in the UAW. But I think that those are issues that the trade union bureaucracy do not want really to have a discussion on within the labor movement, because it threatens their control. That's where we have to go, I think.
Thank you, Steve. The stack is open. Henry, did you want to verbalize that?
Nope.
Cool. Amazing. Stack is still open. We have time for maybe one or two more comments or thoughts. I posted the questions back into chat, after which we'll close and begin to close out the event for the evening. Peter, you're on Stack.
I hope you can hear me. Not being a member of UAW, I don't really have a whole lot to add to that. But having worked in quite a few industrial unions, my experience is the leadership is very afraid of its members, and I assume this is the case as well. And UAW is not a rank and file democratic union. Therefore, any rank and file movement is going to be threatening. I participated in steelworkers rank and file movement way back, where Sadlowski was running for president against McBride, and these guys play for keeps. I mean, it's not a surprise to me that this was shut down. But on the other hand, it's not going to go away. The rank and file movement doesn't disappear because the leadership of the union pulls the rug out. And it didn't in the steelworkers either, even though it was a much tougher fight, and people were killed in that fight, actually, in Sadlowski's campaign. So all I can say is that to position this as, well, the leadership of the union was playing unfair, or they're not democratic. Well, of course, that's kind of goes without saying. So what the question to you is, what do you do? What's your response? Not who is right and who is wrong, but what exactly is your strategy in a semi-reformed leadership where you're still trying to push for rank and file democracy? It's, the structure of the UAW is not conducive to any democracy whatsoever. So there needs to be both a kind of semi-independent from the union rank and file movement, yet at the same time incorporating, the vast majority of people, the biggest, membership that you can include within that rank and file movement. And my own personal view is it has to be led and directed mostly at the core membership of UAW and in the production plants and in the auto plants themselves, rather than led outside of those plants. So anyway, that's just some thoughts. Again, I don't have the participation in UAW, but over the years and other unions, I've seen this happen over and over again. UE, of course, which I participated in, did not have this problem and never has, because of the structure of the organization itself. Very different. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Andrew, you're on stack. After Andrews, we'll wrap up for the event. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I wanted to try to respond to a couple of those things quickly to summarize, because I think in this forum, those of us who are against dissolution have spent a lot of time telling you why we were against dissolution, but not about our path forward. So I shared a document in the chat that's from a group of us that was opposing dissolution, basically asking the question, what does class struggle mean to us? And I think that a lot of us regret that we didn't ask this question sooner, because unfortunately we kind of let reform and class struggle get kind of merged together into this kind of thing that was politically very unclear and kind of ended up just becoming, for some people support Sean Fain, but for other people, sure, support Sean Fain, but as part of a bigger class struggle program and remain independent, as you referred to, of anyone, Fain or anyone else, while we try to seek that. And yeah, absolutely, to those of us in that kind of class struggle wing, I think being led by auto workers is crucial. And, I guess I would also just include manufacturing workers in particular, because some of our great leaders are from Deere or from independent parts suppliers. But yeah, myself, I've been on the shop floor here at GM for about 1.5 years. And one thing that we haven't talked about in UAWD nearly enough, but I've learned from the struggle here with wonderful comrades, is the importance of talking about worker control. And by that, I don't necessarily mean collectivization of the means of production, although, many of us on the left do support that. But I mean much simpler ideas about who sets our schedules. Can we get rescheduled 6 hours into a shift? Can we get told that we're on mandatory overtime all of a sudden for months at a time? Can we have disciplines that don't follow any contractual basis, but are suddenly forced upon us? Things that in some cases are as simple as just contract enforcement, but are in other cases are just basic dignity about like who gets to set the terms of going to work. And this is a set of ideas that's very old. Obviously, those of us here, socialists, none of those are new concepts. But the notion that they would be key aspects of the rank and file movement, that is, for whatever reason, not the commonplace sort of norm in this day and age. It was obviously normal if you go back a century ago to the CIO, but it's not normal anymore. And a lot of the much more sort of reform ideas about transparency and leadership accountability have taken the place of much more direct ideas about worker control and building up militancy. So for us, that's the strategy forward to kind of answer your question here. I mean, that's obviously not, not a day-by-day path, but the idea is to actually build up a more sort of class-based, class struggle program that takes on these questions seriously and asks how we can build up shop floor movements that fight for them. And then obviously also engages in questions of contracts. We're not like totally, antagonistic to the idea of engaging in more bureaucratic questions, but doesn't center those bureaucratic questions as the only thing that you can possibly do.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending this forum and engaging with these questions. I'm going to pass this back to Henry, our managing editor, to close us out.
Yeah, so again, we just want to thank folks for coming, and I would just make two requests of you. Number one is, we cover this kind of stuff. Obviously, it's clear I have an opinion about this, and our other board members. We have a diverse board that has opinions, but we also try to cover it as a news organization, as news in a non-biased manner, as well as providing space for opinion pieces. That takes money, it takes resources to keep that running. And I really believe we're one of the only labor publications that really is providing space for these type of debates. We've actually been covering this dispute before it really even began in its earlier form. So please subscribe to Working Mass if you're not a subscriber. You'll get a print edition. And then also please join our Discord. We just launched it today, but we're hoping to have a bit more of a national labor left space where people can discuss news and discuss labor history and theory. And also, if you like, you can write or contribute graphic design or otherwise to Working Mass. We actually pay people to write. So it's not very much money, but we'd love to have you. And so, again, thank you so much for coming. We are hoping to host a DSA NPC, National Political Committee candidate labor panel, probably sometime in June, which we did 2 years ago. So that'll be the next event to look for. But please join our Discord. I hope to see you there. Please subscribe and have a great evening. Thank you.